want y'all to take a seat this morning. Thank you, worship team, as always. So if I've not had the pleasure to meet you yet, my name is Pastor Adrian Pina, and I'm really glad that you took some time out to worship with us today. And I want to thank those who are joining us on the live stream, as many people have been popping on since we started live streaming, which is pretty cool. And so I want to welcome those guys as well. If you'd like to follow along with the message and some of the other stuff related to today's service, you can do so. Every Sunday, we create an event inside the YouVersion Bible app. If you want to find out information about how to log into that event, also if you want to actually download the app and all the information you need, when you walked in today, you should have received a sheet that says Shady Rest Top 5. On the back side of that sheet gives you all the information that you need in order to go ahead and do that and to participate that way, okay? So we got a lot of ground to cover today and kind of a full service. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump right in. We are going to bring to conclusion our sermon series we started a number of weeks ago called Breathe. It's a sermon series, a short little 3-week series that we did on the concept of rest. I hope that you guys have gotten something out of this, because I have been directly very challenged by this actual sermon series. Oftentimes when we think about the concept of rest, all we think about is just the ceasing of doing stuff. Just not doing anything. It doesn't mean just to be in your pajamas and be lazy, okay? Although that could be part of it sometimes. But we think of rest just as the ceasing of activity, sleep, or something along those lines. But during this series, we have addressed the concept of rest from a few different angles. We began the very first week that we started this series, we built a theology of rest. We looked at the concept of rest and we traced it through the scripture a little bit. And we looked back how at creation, God was the one who instituted the concept of rest, even though he himself did not need it. And we looked forward and saw how that rest is a gift that comes from God. It's not a burden. It's not something we should avoid. It's something that we should cherish because God gives it to us as a gift. Last time we were together in this series, we looked at Jesus' invitation that he gives us in Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30, when he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you" what? Rest. I will give you rest. It's Jesus' own invitation, red letter stuff, when he's talking about this rest that he gives. We saw that it was an invitation that he gives when he says, "Come to me." We saw that it was a promise because he said, "I will give you rest." And then we saw that there's an exchange that takes place because he talked about how my yoke is easy and my burden is light. He said to exchange the yoke that we put upon ourselves, the yoke that is heavy laden, he says exchange it for the yoke that he has, which is easy and light. Just as a means of review, our one truth statement for that message was that rest in Christ's work and not our own. So we rest in what Christ did for us and not on our own merits, okay? So, if you think about this concept of rest, Americans are the worst at resting. According to one study, only 1 in 7 adults, 14%, have set aside an entire day for the purpose of rest. Now, for those who do set aside, that 14% who set aside an entire day, can you guess how they actually spend their time? What do y'all think? Cleaning their house. Some of y'all said, what else do you say that they spend their time? Grocery shopping, I heard, and some other different things. They spend their time doing work. So in general, just umbrella, they spend their time doing work. So they may set aside a time to rest, and yet they fill it with work. Over 40% of that 14 say that they fill it with enjoyable work. Who knows what that means? Sound like work to me. 37% say that they will do non-enjoyable work that has to get done, aka chores, housework, vacuuming, laundry, all the list of stuff that you could put in there. Out of the 14% who set aside a day of rest, only 19% said they will not work at all on their day of rest. Now, too many of us, you probably like me, have been so conditioned by the efficiency at times of feeling the inefficiency, that we think it's inefficient to have what we would consider unproductive time. We consider that maybe to be irresponsible, to be lazy, or even to be selfish. But we know that we need to rest, and we can no longer see the value of rest as an end in itself. It is only worthwhile if it helps us recharge our batteries so we can be even more efficient the next period of productivity. That's how often people view it. They don't see rest as it ends in and of itself. They see, how can I be rested enough so I can do the next thing? How can I get charged up just enough, drink enough coffee, drink enough Monster energy drinks to be able to do the next thing that's on the to-do list so I could tackle the next objective? To many, rest is no longer a priority. We do it out of our necessity when our bodies are literally shutting down. We see it as a means to an end rather than a goal in and of itself. Let me say that again. Rest is not a means to an end. It's not a means to, okay, if I rest enough, I could do something else. We need to see it as a goal in and of itself. Because I'll tell you right now, if you've been really bad at resting, you will find it very hard when you actually even try to set aside time to rest for you actually to enter into a state of rest. Y'all ever do that before? Y'all ever been on vacation and say, oh, I just can't wait to get to vacation, and then for like the first 3 days of vacation, you're wound as tight as could be? Because your body's in a different location, but your mind is still not at rest. You're still thinking about all those different things that you got to do when you get home. Here's something that's interesting, and I know and I think that this is going to challenge you today as much as it challenged me as we look at a passage of Scripture today. Here's my one true statement for you, is that according to Jesus, red letter stuff, rest is a priority. So according to Jesus, rest is a priority. It's not something that's secondary. It's not something that you can ignore. It's something that is a priority. And I'm going to show you in today's text that from a human standpoint, in a situation in time of what was going on, what we're going to read today, that on a human level, we would say it make no sense that Jesus would say to rest at that time, and yet he does, because he shows you that's how important it is. So according to Jesus, rest is a priority. It's not a suggestion. It's not secondary. It's not something that you could just put to the side. It's a priority that you should focus on as a goal in and of itself. So let's talk about prioritizing rest today. That's how we're going to finish off this series. Life is all about priorities. And you will venture and you will change the way that you structure your time in your life based upon things you prioritize. And if you prioritize rest, then you will make time for it, okay? So let's go ahead and talk about prioritizing rest today. And Mark chapter 6 is where we're going to find ourselves. So if you want to follow along in the Bible, or you want to follow along on the screen behind me, we're going to find ourselves in Mark chapter 6, starting at verse 30, and we're going to look at three verses 30 through 32. And I want to share with you three characteristics of rest according to these simple words that Jesus gives in no particular order in and of themselves. But let me set the stage before we actually get into the passage. If you read the book of Mark, which many people attribute as being the first gospel, okay, as far as when it was actually written, in the early chapters of Mark, Jesus' birth and everything is not really given as much time as it is in other books. And basically, we get right into the ministry of Jesus. And Jesus is immediately active, and he's completed a busy season of ministry. In Mark chapter 4, at the end of it, he calms the storm on the sea. At the beginning of Mark chapter 5, he heals the demon-possessed man. At the middle part of Mark chapter 5 is the story with the woman of the issue of blood who he heals. And continuing on in that story, he raises Jairus' daughter from the dead. All these things have happened in a very short amount of time. And then not only that, Jesus actually commissions his disciples to go out and minister on his behalf. And he gives them a mandate, he gives them authority, he gives them a power to do so. So now, not only has Jesus done all this stuff, now the disciples are active in ministry. They're excited. The crowds are beginning to expand. Jesus' name is starting to spread. Crowds continue to follow him. And the disciples, they have done all kind of awesome ministry as well. And they can't wait to report to Jesus all that they had done. Look at verse 30. Verse 30 says that the apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done or taught. Just to frame this for you. The apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. So ministry is going on like crazy. Ministry's just going on everywhere. Jesus is healing people. He's delivering demon-possessed people. He's raising people from the dead. All this stuff is going on. All this stuff is kind of going around the periphery. Everything is happening. So on a human level, it seems to make no sense because everything is going right. Wouldn't you just want to keep on doing it, keep on doing more? And yet Jesus is going to say, pause, take a break for a second. We need to rest. So look at verse 31, the beginning part. The first thing I want you to see is that Jesus commands his followers to rest. By the way, these 3 verses come right before Jesus feeds the 5,000. Jesus is about to do one of the only miracle that is accounted in all the Gospels, one of the biggest miracles that we have seen when he takes a boy's sack lunch and he divides it and causes it to multiply to feed this huge crowd that's gathering, and they're all gathering because Jesus is doing and his disciples are doing all this amazing stuff. And right before they go into this next miracle that's going to take place, Jesus is going to tell them, time out, we got to rest. Time out. All this stuff is happening, but we need to put a pause on it. So Jesus commands his followers to rest. Verse 31. And he said to them, come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest for a while. 2 different commands. Come away and rest. 2 different commands, 2 imperatives that Jesus actually gives his disciples. The disciples had just reported to him. Remember, we just read verse 30. And then he says, as excited as they are and all this stuff that's going on, he says, come away, rest. All this fruitful ministry that is going on. And I love the fact that Jesus says, go to a desolate place, which literally means wilderness or desert. Now, if y'all are like me, you're saying, well, if you are not an outdoorsy person like me, I do not like the idea of wilderness or desert, to go away to be desolate. Okay, I could be desolate on a beach somewhere, but don't stick me in the middle of the woods, okay? But that's not the point. I think the point that Jesus is trying to make, whether you're an outdoors type or not, is that the principle, I think, for you and me today would be come aside to a place where you can disconnect with people, situations, circumstances, all that stuff, and where you can connect with God. Get away to a place where you can have silence. Sometimes we're scared of the silence, right? You ever be in that situation, it's like that awkward silence, and people are just like scared of the silence. Sometimes we are so prone to be active, and my mind is like this, that it's hard just to be quiet. It's hard just to sit in the silence, and there's nothing wrong with it. Jesus says, I want you to go to a place that's purposely desolate, so that way you can be able to spend time connecting with me, and so that you can get away from everything else that is going on. I don't care. Pastor Pina's paraphrase. It doesn't matter to me that you just had fruitful ministry. I'm telling you right now, you need to rest. Jesus is showing something very clear here. And let me challenge you, to those of you who have been believers in faith for a long time, those of you that are committed to the call to make a difference in this world, to be disciple makers, to be the ones who take the Great Commission seriously, who know what it means to be part of the church and all that. Let me say something to you that will challenge you, okay? That challenges me. Jesus is showing us that it is important to prioritize rest, that it's important to prioritize rest, just as important as it is to prioritize ministry. Listen to me. There'll always be another person. There'll always be another circumstance. There'll always be another opportunity for you to serve somewhere. There'll always be something else for you to be able to do. But Jesus is saying, after they just came out of ministry, it's important to rest, not just to be involved in ministry. And sometimes we will say that we're serving Jesus. Please hear me. Sometimes we will say that we are actually serving Jesus and doing the will of God to the detriment of what our bodies are even telling us, just because we're doing that next thing, that we're working for God, when I would challenge you, and Jesus is probably saying you're actually being disobedient to God, because God is already, your body's literally telling you, you need to shut it down and you need to rest, not push through to do the next thing, and yet you're ignoring what God has put within you. It's as equally important for you to rest, and you can be disobedient when it comes to that, as much as it is for that next opportunity of ministry. They're not mutually exclusive. There's not one that's more important to the detriment of the other. He had just commissioned his disciples, and now he tells them to rest. So if you are sacrificing rest in the name of ministry, do not try to cloak it in holiness, or do not try to cloak it in righteousness. You are disobeying God and rejecting his gift of rest that he has given you. Let that sink in and pause for a second. Now, have you ever been so excited for something that you were working on that all you could do was focus on that thing? Maybe it's a project at work. Maybe it's something in your home. Maybe you got a building project going on in your home. Maybe it's something, this new business that you're starting up. You are so excited and so focused on this project. Everything else is not as important. It seems like you got tunnel vision. All you want to do is give every waking moment that you want to whatever this thing is, whether it's that new business, that new thing in your home, this new project at work, the expansion of your existing business, whatever it may be. You burn the proverbial candle at both ends. Coffee becomes your best friend. And you work long hours and you complain about being tired. You ever had that happen before? You're so focused on this project and then you're working, you work these long hours and you complain, oh, I'm so tired, oh, but I gotta get this done. And you just keep on pushing through, you push through, you push through, you push through because the task at hand you deem as being very important. The same could be said for ministry. We can be working for God so much that we lose sight of what our bodies, our minds are literally trying to tell us. You can literally work yourself to death in ministry, and you can, here's the sobering reality. You can work yourself to death for God and not be connected to him. Oh, let me just say that again. You can work yourself to death for God and not be connected to him at all. You could be doing all this stuff and saying, I'm doing it for God, and yet you are not connecting with him on a personal level, on a personal basis at all. You're doing all this stuff, giving of yourself and doing all this, and then you wonder why you run dry. You wonder why you just feel exhausted mentally, physically, because when you're giving of yourself on a spiritual level, you're giving of yourself, your mind, your spirit, your body. You're giving all of this when you're giving it to ministry, and if you are not filling up, if you are not connecting, if you are not refueling, if I can say it that way, if you ain't going to the gas station and you ain't refueling spiritually, you're going to run on spiritual fumes. And guess what? If you run on spiritual fumes, you will break down. Why do you think people get burnt out in ministry? People get burnt out in ministry because the ministry task has become more important than their own physical well-being. And they see as caring for their own spirit, their own physical well-being as being selfish. We're going to talk about that. I'm not going to get ahead of myself. This is the height of ministry. On a human level, could you see that it makes no sense for them to stop? Jesus' name is getting out there. The crowds are growing. All this stuff is happening. Miracles are happening. Folks getting raised from the dead. All this awesome stuff. This on a human level would be the perfect reason not to stop. And yet Jesus says in his infinite wisdom, go away to a place where you're away from this crowd, and I want you to rest and disconnect from them. But Jesus, isn't it all about people? I want you to disconnect from them. Our friends, Landon and Kelly, who you have met, who pastor Livingstone Church in San Antonio, who have been here before, we love those guys. They once taught Jen and I about a principle that I want to teach you about called the 777 principle. Okay? So it's called the 777 principle. I'm going to add an additional 7, so I'm going to say the 7777 principle, okay? So let me go ahead and explain this to you. Every 7 days, you take off 1 day. Okay, that's what God did, right? So God worked 6, he took off the 7th in that way. Every 7 weeks, you take at least 3 days off. Okay? Every 7 months, you take at least 1 week off. And here's my addition. Every 7 years, you take a sabbatical, take an extended period of time off. What I mean by extended is I mean take off at least a month, if not more, that you could take off. So every 7 days, take 1 day off. Every 7 weeks, take 3 days off. Every 7 months, take 1 week off. And every 7 years, take an extended period of time off. Now, I'm not going to pretend that we do this perfectly, but I believe that this doesn't just relate to somebody who's in ministry. I believe that this is a very healthy principle for any person if you are a believer and you take the concept of rest seriously. Okay, this is something that you should do, that you should institute in your life, because God wants you to receive his gift that he's given you, this gift called rest. Overtime is nice. Oh, that nice big paycheck is nice, but is it worth your physical health? Is it worth you literally working yourself to death? Is it worth it at the end? Is that overtime paycheck real nice? Is it worth it for you not to be able to spend time with your family? All of those things suffer when things are not in balance because we are not resting, we are not prioritizing rest. Okay? So the 7-7-7 addition, one additional 7 principle. All right, let's look at verse 30. Let's go back to verse 30. And I want to talk about the second principle. It's really important. You need to take time to process. Take time to process. Verse 30. The apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and all that they had taught. Now imagine some of the conversations that went on. I would love to have been a fly on the wall to see some of these conversations. Imagine the disciples running up to Jesus saying, hey, Jesus, we just healed this person who was lame and couldn't walk. I mean, we did it in your name. It was awesome. It was amazing. I mean, we talked to all these people and they believed in you. And I mean, incredible things, all the different things that they could have shared. Can you imagine the level of excitement that they must have had about all that had been done? I mean, last week, we got to share with you a little bit about what God did in Ecuador. And I don't know about you, but me, Jason, Sue Ellen, and Christopher, we were pretty excited, and Francis, about all the stuff that got done in Ecuador. But imagine being with Jesus literally bodily and telling Jesus in bodily form, hey, Jesus, look at all this awesome stuff we did in your name. You told us to go, and all this amazing stuff started happening. They were so excited about all the stuff that has started happening. Last week when we had the opportunity to share with you some incredible things that God did in Ecuador, sharing those stories allows us to process our experience, but also to brag on what God did. Here's the thing. Catch this. Oh man, when this hit me like a ton of bricks this week. If you do not take time to rest, you will not be able to see what God is doing in your life. Let me say that again. If you do not take time to rest, then you will miss being able to process what is going on in your life and how God is working. Because all it'll be constant motion. You won't actually take time to process, synthesize what is happening in your experience. What has God been telling you as you've been reading? What has God been ministering to you as you've been connecting with him? If everything's rush, then what happens is you will not be able to take time to actually process that and be able to appreciate what God is doing and how he is moving. The disciples needed time to process. Resting should involve deliberately focused time celebrating and processing all that God is doing. And you can't do that when your mind is racing. When your mind is racing, you miss seeing what God is, how he has been at work. So what has God been up to in your life? Have you actually taken time to process through that? Maybe some of you, I would encourage you, I'm not necessarily a journaler, I'm trying to be better about that, but some of you I know like to journal. Journaling is a really good tool to slow down, to rest, and to process what God is communicating to you. When our minds and bodies are at rest, we can start asking reflective questions. We can start asking God, how is this working in my life? What are you trying to teach me? Please show me. You can ask all those different things when you finally take time to rest. Jesus himself is always our model, and Jesus often took times in the Gospels to withdraw himself, to be able to take times to reflect and to pray. Verse 44 through 47, if you just jump down in this verse, here's Jesus himself. It says, immediately after the miracle had taken place, after they feed the 5,000, it says, immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, where while he dismissed the crowd. Jesus told the crowd, all right, this has been done. Now you got to get away. I got to get away. He dismisses them. He says, all right, service is done. Go home. be in peace. After he had taken leave of them, it says he went up on the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out alone at sea, and he was alone on the land. Jesus, at the peak of when a miracle had just taken place, dismisses the crowd. He gets away so he can reflect on what has happened, and so that way he can connect with God and he can pray. Jesus sets the example for us. If you are never at rest, you will never have time to process what God is doing in your life. Reflection takes place best when your mind is at rest. That's a tweetable comment. Let me say that again. Reflection takes place best when your mind is at rest. Think about whatever your most restful place is. For some of you, that might be your front porch. Some of you, that might be your garden. Some of you, it might be like me. I could just envision sitting on a beach chair reading a book, okay? Whatever your restful kind of peaceful place is, when you're there, just if you could picture yourself being there right now, when your mind is finally not racing, don't you feel like you can have more time to reflect and connect with God? Especially if you're out in creation. If you're out in creation and your mind's at rest, don't you ever find yourself, your mind finally starting to focus on God and just saying, God, look at how the God who made the waves. Look at the God who calmed the sea. He's the one who could calm the sea. And the funny thing is that the creation you live in right now is under the dominion of sin. Sin also broke this world, and yet it's still beautiful. Imagine how it would be without sin. Because you're taking time to process. Here's the last thing. And here's the one thing that's probably going to be very challenging for you as it is for me at times. To rest is not selfish. It's not selfish. Verse 31 and 32, the end of verse 31. And it says, for many were coming and going, the crowd, and they had no leisure even to eat. Talking about the disciples, they were so busy that they didn't even spend time to take a lunch break. And they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. I don't know about you, but have you ever found it that when you have gotten so busy, especially when it comes to serving people, that you often forget about yourself and your own specific needs? Can we be real with that? Sometimes we're just serving people. We're doing things like you're always the first person that your family calls when there's crisis, and you're always trying to meet needs to the own detriment of your own personal need. Because you feel like it's somehow selfish if you don't actually race to the rescue because underneath your shirt is a big S and you're Superman or Superwoman. But this is a false narrative. It's a false narrative in many people's minds that to take time for yourself is somehow selfish. That you should not be able to take time for yourself. Many people believe that. Some people believe that deliberately, and some of you believe it unconsciously, but you do it, your actions sabotage you. Your actions sabotage your rest that God wants to give you. You are literally being robbed of it, being sabotaged by somebody else, by some other circumstance, and you have somehow in your mind thought that it's selfish for you to say no, or selfish for you to take aside a time and just to be able to say no. I need to prioritize my rest over this activity. I need to prioritize my rest over this next thing. This is what I need to prioritize. Let me illustrate this for you. How many of y'all here are stay-at-home parents? We have any stay-at-home parents here? So we have some stay-at-home parents here, right? Now, this is perfectly exemplified when it comes to this, but I'll give you some other examples as well. If you are a stay-at-home mom or stay-at-home dad and your spouse is primarily the breadwinner in your home and they work, your responsibility might be to take care of the home and take care of the kids. But if you ask yourself honestly, have you ever felt guilty about asking your spouse just for an hour to have to yourself? Have you ever felt guilty about that because you think, well, they're out there working, that somehow what that really translates to is that what I'm doing is not as important as what they are doing because they're the ones making money and I'm not basically making money. You may never say that to yourself, but your actions speak otherwise, and you feel guilty to even say, I need an hour just to myself. Can I just have an hour to myself? It's not selfish. Because you may subconsciously see your work as not as important. Maybe you don't even have kids, but have you ever felt bad? Maybe you felt you've been in this particular situation. Have you ever felt bad when someone asks you to help them out when you know that your body, your schedule, your mind, everything is telling you no, and yet you still say yes? You ever had that happen before? Whether it's watching your siblings' kids, whether it's helping at a friend's house, helping somebody move, etc., whatever the activity may be. And sometimes, maybe some of y'all are part of families that my family has done this before, where you get the guilt trip for it, right? So that makes you feel even worse. Because somebody didn't tell you that there were expectations that came along with you doing something, with them doing something for you that they expected you to necessarily reciprocate in return, and that somehow you are obligated to this contract you didn't know existed. Well, I watched your kids last week. How come you can't watch my kids? Because I'm basically collapsing, about to fall over dead right now, and you want me to watch your kids. It's not selfish to say no. But somehow we've programmed this thing into our mind like we have some type of obligation in a way where we sabotage ourselves for the sakes of others. And then when we do that, what are you really benefiting them for? What are you really benefiting yourself if you're sabotaging yourself when it comes to that? Ladies and gentlemen, there will always be people, there will always be circumstances, there will always be needs that demands of your attention and demand from you, and they will literally eat you alive if you do not prioritize rest. Guess what comes in? It's something the opposite. It's called stress. And stress will literally eat you for lunch and spit you out. We all have people in our family. You likely have people in your family, and some of you under the sound of my voice today, this is you. That you're the person in the family who's always the martyr. Here's what I mean by that. You're the one that everybody always calls and has some expectation that you're going to drop everything that you are doing right now to be able to fit their need. And you have propagated that idea because of your actions. And then you get mad at them because you feel like they're taking advantage of you, but you will never tell them because your actions have allowed them to believe subconsciously that this somehow transactional relationship is actually existing. Some unspoken expectation and contract. Some of you, that's you. Some of you need to learn this 2-letter word. It's called no. And you don't need to feel bad by saying it. You don't have to be under some subconscious obligation all the time to be able to do that. If Jesus himself prioritized rest and the master himself, the creator of the universe, sent away his creation after he just did a miracle, he says, okay, now you go home. I got to have some me time. And he said, I got to go connect with God. I got to go ahead and refuel. Y'all been following me, but I fed you now. You were weary and you needed to be fed. I fed you spiritually and I fed you physically. Now you need to go because now I need to be with me. Y'all laugh about that, but listen, this is the creator of the universe who said that. Why are you any different? Why would you think that somehow you're superhuman when Jesus himself said, I need to go away and get to a place where I can rest? He even sent away his disciples. He sent them on a boat. He said, y'all go before me. I'm going to dismiss this crowd. I'm going to get alone. I'm going to have some me time. Just me and God. I don't want you around. I don't want anybody else around. And guess what? That's okay. That's okay. Unfortunately, like I said, we know many people like this in our family, and some of you, that might be you. And unfortunately, for many times, I've had this conversation with my mom over and over again. I've told her, you can't be a martyr. Sometimes you need to learn to say no. Because people will take advantage of you to do so, and then you will end up feeling somehow some self-inflicted guilt that you put on yourself because somebody's trying to guilt trip you. But that's not of God. That's not of God. Let's summarize this for you and we'll close. So my one true statement to you today is that according to Jesus, rest is a priority. For example, this month, and I know that some of y'all parents are really gracious, one of the reasons why we do during the summers, we do this thing, Family Sundays, through the end of June all the way through July is because it takes a lot of work to do VBS. That's why we shut down ministry, basically, which seems awkward for most people. We purposely make the decision to kind of shut down ministry because it takes a huge tribe of everybody to not only run VBS, but then also to take a break between July and August. You know that basically all of our ministries essentially shut down. And the reason we do that is so that way you can have a break during the summer. That way you can connect with God. That way you can spend time with your family. You can go on your vacations. You can do all that because we want to give you a time of rest. And sometimes you need that push because you won't do it yourself. So that's why we intentionally do it as a church every single year when we build it into the calendar. It seems awkward. A lot of churches don't do that, but we purposely do that, and we will continue to purposely do that because we believe rest is a priority. Because according to Jesus, it is. So Jesus commands his followers to rest. He commanded his disciples to rest. But then also we talked about you have to rest in order to take time to process what God is doing in your life. You will literally miss what God is doing in your life if your mind is always racing. And then lastly, we talked about it that it is not selfish to rest. You do not have to feel guilty by somebody else putting a guilt trip on you that somehow you are obligated to meet all of their needs. That sometimes you can take time to be able to rest and be by yourself because you need that for your own mental sanity and for your own physical well-being. So how can we put this into practice? And we're going to go ahead and pray. I'm going to ask the prayer team if y'all will come forward. Polly, will you come forward as well? And so we're going to go ahead and take the opportunity to pray. But I want to encourage you guys. I told you all about the 7-7-7-7 rule today. I want to encourage you. I noticed some of y'all taking pictures of that. I want to encourage you to put this into practice as much as you can. Now I know, and I'm not trying to be a legalist, because I know that sometimes life and situations and extenuating circumstances get in the way. However, I will say that if you are not practicing something for it to become a habit, then what will become a habit is bad habits, okay? So try to, as much as you can, put this into practice. Take that day to rest. Every 7 weeks, take that 3 or 4 days to rest. Every 7 months, take that vacation. And every 7 years, hopefully take that extended break. So you can be able to reflect, take time to be able to rest. And then also, all of life really comes down to this. How are you going to manage and prioritize your life? Is rest a priority to you, or is it something that you just see that it's just necessary because my body needs to shut down? Like shutting down a computer. Or do you believe that it's necessary to your well-being? And I would eventually even say, and I think we've shown in this series, it's necessary to your overall spiritual health, not just your physical health. Will you take an opportunity to make it a priority, to plan it out? We call this white space. If you look at my calendar on my phone, it looks really, really packed. And the reason why is because I have 3 calendars on my phone. I have my personal calendar, I have the church's calendar, and I have Jen's calendar on there. The natural default, what we used to do is we used to see when there was white space there, we used to think, well, how can we fill that? Maybe we can have another appointment. Maybe we can meet with another person. Maybe we can go in and schedule dinner with this person or do this or do that. Now when I see white space, and we purposely build around white space. White space comes first. So here's a statement for you that maybe is easy to remember. Protect the white space. Protect it. Because there'll always be circumstances, people, situation that will invade into that, and they will rob you of your rest. Let's pray. Well, Lord, this is a challenge to us today because, Lord, it's very unnatural in some senses. And we could look at this passage and see how you literally, in the midst of a fruitful, productive, booming, awesome time of ministry, told your disciples, we got to get away and we got to rest. And then you made it a priority after the feeding of the 5,000 to send them away, to send the crowd away. And you spent time to get away by yourself to connect with God and to refresh and refuel. Lord, when we're giving of ourselves mind, body, and spirit. We're giving of our total selves, especially those who are believers, as we give of ourselves, Lord, for the purpose of your kingdom. We give of ourselves, Lord, to others because we want to emulate your characteristics in your life, Lord. But Lord, if we are not spending time to refuel, to reconnect, to recharge with you, then we are running on fumes and we will break down. And I don't want to see anybody in this room break down. I don't want to see anyone who wants to throw in the towel, who's frustrated with following you and frustrated with ministry and being able to serve others because they have been so overburdened by the fact that they have not prioritized and learned this precious gift that you have given us called rest. So Lord, help us to do that in a better way today.